I chose last Sunday and this Sunday to work out of the book of Isaiah, the Old Testament texts in the lectionary. Don't know if Pastor will be using the Matthew 1:18-25 gospel text this morning for his sermon or not. If he does, you'll see connection between this text and that text. And he did the John the Baptist chapter 11 text, Matthew, last week, and there was a connection there with that text. So, and I did the commercial last week for why this would be a good time to do Isaiah texts. Just sort of catch up the 2 Sundays of Advent that we didn't deal with out of Isaiah. The first Sunday of Advent, the Isaiah text is chapter 2, and maybe it would, well, not maybe, something I say to my seminary classes on a regular basis. Don't say we haven't got time to read the whole text. That's saying that your words as the preacher are more important than God's words in the Scripture. So maybe we should just start with, on the first Sunday of Advent, this was the text. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established as the highest of the mountains, shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. What a marvelous eschatological text. What a marvelous vision of hope for the future. Of a day when there is no war college. There are no arms being manufactured. And the reason that day would be a possibility even, it is not because of negotiations of peace, but because all the world comes to Jerusalem, to the house of God, to be instructed by God, to learn his words and to learn how to walk in his ways. Marvelous kind of hope that sets up the beginning of the Advent season, and thus the whole concept that we began Advent with, hope. In the world in which we live right now, well, in the world in which Neil, you may have been born before the Cold War began. I don't know.
31.
Yeah, so you might remember pre-Cold War.
Yes.
Most of the rest of us, all we remember was the Cold War and the life in the Cold War and all of that. And now it's no longer just us in the Soviet Union, but it's all this of terrorism. And a promise and a hope like this for a future like this. It is marvelous good news from the gospel. Part of the reason Isaiah would be called the gospel of the Old Testament. The second Sunday, 2 weeks ago, scroll and just go Isaiah chapter 11. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of knowledge and might, the Spirit of counsel and might, and the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall live with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, and their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand in the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. On that day the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. The nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling shall be glorious. It's another marvelous vision of the future, isn't it? Wolf lying down with the lamb, leopard with the kid.
On a day like today, that's understandable.
Yeah, trying to get warm together. Yeah. Somebody at tractor meeting when we read this recently said, "Yeah, but the lamb will not sleep." Like that. I don't know about that. The difference of this text is it connects it to a person, to the shoot arising from the stump of Jesse. So some kind of Davidic messianic figure is being connected to this vision of hope. So there's an increase of specificity of the Advent hope in this particular text. Yeah, Marcia.
Well, I was going to say, this second text, we usually link that part with heaven, with the peace. But the first section you read, is that a prophecy? You said a prophecy and a promise. Is that talking about heaven, or is that talking about something else? Because I don't know any time we haven't ever had peace, and there weren't any weapons and that sort of thing.
Well, I don't know, as you
think
know.
it-
I
you
don't
think
know
it's-
about these things.
Do you think he's saying that there's a time that's coming on earth when that could happen?
Well, it says he will decide with equity for the meek of the earth. The text is set in the context of earth. It's not set in the context of heaven.
But is the meek of the earth just the people from earth going to heaven?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. There's a whole lot of this text that talks heaven. It's like we put it in heaven because we couldn't imagine it on earth.
That's right.
And just to snatch one phrase out of Revelation, what is coming is not just heaven, but a new heaven and a new earth. And so a part of what appears to be, if you want to talk about the kind of the holistic biblical vision of the future, is restoration of this planet also.
Well, when it talks about righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, are they talking about Christ then at that point?
I think so. I mean, yes and no. I don't know that Isaiah has like Jesus' driver's license or something to have a picture of who he is, but he has. It's connected to this vision of a Davidic king, and we've come to understand that as Christ, which we'll maybe pick up on a word in today's lesson. Well, then last week we did the Isaiah 35, 1 to 10 passage, which had both the transformation of human creation and of what we would call nature creation, being restored into God's creation purposes, which I probably don't say as much in this context as I do maybe at the seminary, where we talk about the mission, Missio Dei, the mission of God a lot. And Doug's probably tired of hearing me say it. My interpretation of the mission of God is the restoration of all creation, human and natural alike, all creation, to God's creation purposes. That God's mission is to get everything fixed the way He intended it to be, and that's our hope. Now, I know too many cynics in the church whose conclusion is, well, that'll never happen. Well, it may be that they would help make sure it never happens. I don't know. But a part of the transformation that second coming symbolizes is second starting of all of this sort of thing, too. Okay? Well, the text for today is Isaiah chapter 7. And the text assigned begins in verse 10, goes through 16. But this is a text that felt to me like we needed the larger context to have much understanding of it. So, let's start with context. Someone want to read verses 1 and 2? If you're good with Old Testament names or just don't mind reading them anyway, taking your best guess, well, have at it.
In the days of Ahaz, son of Jotham, son of Josiah, king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, went up to attack Jerusalem, but could not mount an attack against it. When the house of David heard that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook, as the trees of the forest shake before the wind.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. What's the context?
They're under attack.
Who's under attack?
Israel.
Nope.
No? Judah?
Judah. And in particular, the context of Jerusalem and Judah is the time of who? Ahaz or Ahaz, which we think served as king from about 735 to about 715 BC. Okay. During that time, the dominant power of the ancient Near East was Assyria. And this is somewhat fresh in my mind, having gone through this with the Spanish course of study class that I did last week. It's interesting, you got the powers of Mesopotamia, either Assyria or Babylon, and for much of the period from 500 BC back to 3000 BC, they sort of fluctuated between either Assyria being up, well, we'll just do it this way. You know where Assyria is, don't you? That's what I was
Is
afraid of.
Assyria and Syria the same thing?
Nope.
No.
Syria and Assyria is a distinction we need to be aware of. Let me find a Middle Eastern map. Maybe this will work. Okay. Mesopotamia runs through here. Babylon down near the Persian Gulf today, and Assyria up by Nineveh, further upriver. The Tigris and Euphrates are the reason Mesopotamia is Mesopotamia. Those are the two great rivers, and Mesopotamia is a Greek word meaning between the rivers. So this is a fertile valley. The Nile River waters Egypt, comes from the heart of Africa up. And because of the Nile, there were always crops and food to eat in Egypt. And you'll recognize even the Joseph story is a kind of a testament to that. And so it's not surprising that the great civilizations, and if you want to call them the great military powers of the ancient world, were either in Egypt or Mesopotamia. And because there's water there and here, and this is desert. And you can possess all the desert you want, but you can't live there in great populations. And desert is not the place that civilizations develop. It's along the rivers where there's food to eat, and you're not spending every single moment trying to survive. And so you can develop art and music and things, literature, things of that nature. And so you found those things happening on a regular basis. Mesopotamia and Egypt. And if Mesopotamia was going to expand and increase their holdings, what would they want?
They'd want Egypt.
They would want Egypt. If Egypt were to expand and increase their holdings, they'd want Mesopotamia. So here and here are against each other and vying for power, and in between lies
Jerusalem.
Canaan, Israel, all of that sort of stuff. The land bridge that connected the two big powers.
So why didn't they want the land in the middle? Because it's all rocky and yucky.
They didn't want it.
Because of the temperature.
What they wanted from it was foothold and access to the other river. So Israel, Canaan, Lebanon, as we now know today, Syria, were all part of that, if you want to call that, bridge or passageway from one power to the other power. And for those of you that are interested in this kind of thing, the pass that connected in Israel between the two powers was called the Megiddo Pass. And Megiddo was a major spot. Solomon built a chariot city there to control that pass. Josiah, the last righteous king in Judah's history, died at that pass, having allied himself in a battle between Babylon and Egypt. And he decided to join the Egyptians to try to push back against the Babylonians, and it cost him his life there. And those of you that are interested in Revelation, the word for the hill of Megiddo is Har Megiddo, or it's come into English as Harmageddon. And so it's pictured as the last ultimate battle, because all the strategic battles of biblical history were at Megiddo or Harmageddon. So anyway, let's see.
So where was Syria today, and where's Assyria?
Okay. Assyria would be present-day Iraq. the inland part. Syria, more or less where Syria is today, Syria in this text that we just read is called Aram. Damascus is its capital. So it lies, I think you can see, to the north mostly, and a little bit to the east of Israel. Okay? And you can tell even by the lines on this, which are routes taken by various Assyrian invasions. There was a valley that went, pointing at that didn't help you. This valley, coastal things happened there. This is the valley of Baalbek, and then this was another shortcut road that went on and joined up with Mesopotamia a little bit further east, up above. Okay? So, Assyria is the dominant power. Tiglath-Pileser is the primary figure in this period of history. He gives way, do I say here? In, I haven't got it written down. I think it's 727. He gives way to Shalmaneser V, who has 5 years, and he gives way in 722 to Sargon II. Okay? Well, early in Ahaz's reign, so this is 735, Assyria is busy on the northern frontier, far away. So the king of Aram, who is Rezin, here, and King Pekah of what nation? Israel, here, form an alliance, and they're going to try to resist Tiglath-Pileser. While he's busy on the northern frontier, they're going to build up an alliance to resist him and to keep him from invading and taking them over. Okay? They want another ally, who?
Syria.
Well, they already have Syria because that's Aram and Israel. They want Judah, the southern kingdom, to join with them. And the king of the southern kingdom is Ahaz. So Pekah, the king in Samaria of the northern kingdom, Rezin, the king of Aram or in Damascus, are allying together, and they want Ahaz to join them. We're not altogether sure the shape of Ahaz's mind. One never knows the mind of a political ruler. But he seems to not be totally enthralled with this idea. In fact, what does our text say about him?
I'm scared.
Yeah. Into verse 2. The heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the leaves of the forest shake before the wind. He is scared. Now, he may be scared of Assyria, or he may be scared that if he allies with these two birds, when Assyria finally turns their guns on them, he'll get caught in the fire also. It doesn't explain what all he's nervous about. Okay? So, that's the context. So what is God's word in response to that context? Someone read Isaiah 7, 3 through 9.
Then the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out and meet Ahaz, you and your son Shemir-Jotham, at the end of the conduit at the upper pool on the highway to Fuller's Field. And say to him, take heed, be quiet, do not fear, do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and of Ahab and the son of Ramallah, because of Aram with Ephraim and the son of Ramallah have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and cut off Jerusalem and conquer it for ourselves, and make the son of Tabeel king in it. Therefore says the Lord God, it shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass, for the head of the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is risen. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered, no longer a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Ramallah. If you do not stand firm in faith, you shall not stand at all.
Okay. I thought as you read this, Marcia, must still be North Carolina, they give directions the same way there. You go out the highway to Fuller's, the field that Fuller's used to have.
I thought it sounded like English when it said Fuller's Field.
Shir Yashub, or Jashub in English spelling, means a remnant shall return. This is a son of Isaiah already that's been announced earlier in the book. A remnant shall return, which is a fascinating kind of prophecy simply in the name of a child. What does it mean for one of Isaiah's kids to be named? A remnant shall return. Other than Isaiah's wife probably killed him for doing this.
It's a prophecy, basically, or what they hope that child would be.
Okay. It speaks, number one, that if there's a remnant, what happens to all the rest?
They're going to be wiped out.
Something happens bad to them. But a remnant shall return means there's some small portion that's going to survive and will be back and will possess the land. So it implies the not remnant, the large part, will be dispossessed of the land, will be taken captive. So it appears to be prophecy of the Babylonian captivity. Though this is well over 100 years prior to that event. Okay. Now, what is the Lord's instruction via Isaiah to Ahaz?
Stand firm.
Okay.
But didn't he also say, don't stand with them, don't be fearful, but didn't he also tell him not to go up against them? Well, it says, let's go up against Judah.
Well,
that's what there's.
He doesn't say that, but that's the implication, I think. Take heed, be quiet, which probably doesn't mean shh, but don't be agitated.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be rushing around trying to figure out what to do. Some people think Ahaz was trying to work on the defense system or repair part of the wall or something at this point. I don't know that that's clear. But it could be implied by the be quiet. Do not fear, which is a direct response to verse 2. The heart of him and his people were shaking like the trees in the forest shake before the wind. Don't be afraid. Now, it doesn't say what to do, but don't be afraid because of these two kings. Now, verse 7, it shall not stand. What shall not stand?
Their war against him.
Yeah, their plans against Ahaz, against Jerusalem, will not stand, will not come to pass. Verse 6 suggests that they may have had motivation just to depose Ahaz and put one of their friends in instead to increase the size of the alliance against Tiglath-Pileser. Okay?
So were they basically saying to Ahaz, either you join us or we're going to take you over, or at least they thought they were going to
That appears to be the threat. Communicated to him probably via messengers. Yeah. It may have just been on CNN, though, I don't know. Okay. What do you think of the little parenthetic comment? 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered, no longer a people. First of all, who is Ephraim?
Northern Kingdom.
It's Northern Kingdom, also called Israel, sometimes called Samaria, just for the capital. Yeah. So in 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered. Actually, it didn't take near that long. 722 BC, and we're not sure whether it was Shalmaneser the fifth or Sargon the second who led the army of invasion that just captured Samaria and totally took possession of the northern kingdom. Well, if you remember the map, to get to the northern kingdom of Israel, the Assyrians would have had to have gone through what other country?
Israel.
No, to get to Israel, they would have had to have come through
Mesopotamia.
Syria. They were coming from Mesopotamia, so they would have come through Syria or Aram. And so, reason Aram would have been captured, and the northern kingdom, Pekah, is no longer alive. The northern kingdom has this wonderful history of assassinations, and short-lived in every meaning of the word kings. So Pekah's long gone, and reason's gone because by 722 they've been invaded from Assyria, and they've captured the northern kingdom, and actually are pushing up against, would have gone on and probably captured Jerusalem, but it's probably the transition of power between Shalmaneser and Sargon. They turned back to take care of matters back in Nineveh, the capital. But that would have been another 13 or 14 years from the time of the prophecy. So within 50 years, though, the total population of the northern kingdom of Israel had been redone. Babylon carried the southern kingdom folks captive in mass to Babylon. The Assyrians didn't do that. They took about 20% of the population and spread that 20% around their borders. And they did that everywhere, so that every place in all of their borders had about 20% left of their own population. So they took 80% and dropped them off in various spots, left 20%. If you want to call them native Israelites there. And then they brought the folks from other borders. So all of the nations that were on their frontiers had mixed populations, didn't speak the same language, didn't have the same culture or history, didn't know the geography, didn't know the resources, all of which makes it harder to do what?
Rise up against him.
To rebel against Assyria. So when we talk about the lost tribes of Israel, that's how they got lost. They got mixed in this sort of mixing bowl kind of policy that Assyria had. And so that was totally mixed within another 50 years after the fall in 722.
And that's why the people of Judah did not recognize the other populations, like even Samaria, because there were some mixed blood.
The Samaritans had become this mixed group of 20% Israelite, 20% we would call Turkey, 20% Afghanistan, 20% Iran, Persia, and probably 20% the Emirates or something on the other side of this side of the Persian Gulf. Although some Israelites from the northern kingdom did flee in front of the Assyrian army and took up residence in the southern kingdom and maintained their identity, which you will note, hope we will read it sometime in the season, in Luke chapter 2, where it talks about old Anna the prophetess is of the tribe of Asher. So there was a family that had fled apparently in front of the invasion back in the 700s and kept their tribal identity even in the south somehow. Quite rare sort of thing. Okay. The end of verse 9 is an interesting one. This plan of these foreign kings will not stand. But if you, Ahaz, do not stand firm in faith, you will not stand at all. Which is a way of saying, if you don't believe God and God's promise here, you won't last. Your only hope in this context, with this squeeze play that's being put on by Assyria and by the two kings between you and Assyria, your only hope in this whole process is to have faith in God and to trust God's words of promise of deliverance. Okay?
Roger,
Yeah.
how was this message delivered? Did Isaiah go personally and give it to Ahaz, or did he just write it?
Implication, I think, is he delivered it orally in person. Go meet Ahaz, and it gives the directions where Ahaz is going to be standing or directing whatever he's doing out there. And you say to him, speak to him.
Earlier, I was wondering, what is the purpose of all of this? But it had a present day application. I think of like these
For them.
Yeah, for these prophecies, it shows us the knowledge and power of God, but this was actually current events for them then.
Yep. And now, God's sign. Somebody read 10 through 16.
Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, saying, "Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol, or high as heaven." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test." And Isaiah said, Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary mortals, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child, and shall bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land, before whose 2 kings you are in dread, will be destroyed.
Okay. First, the Lord, presumably through Isaiah, speaks to Ahaz and offers him what? Ask a sign. Is that common operating procedure for God, to
No.
offer signs for folks?
And usually it's very detrimental they ask for a sign. And it doesn't show faith.
There's probably more instances in Scripture where sign and the desire for a sign is seen as a lack of faith. And it's a person negotiating with God saying, prove yourself to me, which God tends to resist. But it's interesting, in this case, God initiates the offer of the sign. Is faith involved in it?
Yes.
I think so. Just because we read them separately, don't disconnect verse 9 and verse 10, or verse 11. Verse 9, if you do not stand firm in faith, you will not stand at all. Okay, ask a sign. What would you like for me to show this to you? Now, what's fascinating is Ahaz's response, which is,
I will not ask.
I'm not going to ask for a sign. Why would he say that?
He was trying to gain favor with God. He was
You
trying
think
to
so?
say- I think he was trying to say, I
Yeah.
have faith without a sign.
This is a fun question because there's no, I don't know, the text doesn't say, so anybody can answer whatever you think. So maybe he knows this tradition that signs are generally bad things, so he's going to play the I'll be spiritual card.
I mean,
Ask for a
there's so
sign.
many battles going on, why start another one? You know?
Yeah. It just strikes odd when God makes an offer that he,
He turns me down.
nah, not interested in this. Particularly since the offer is connected, though, with standing firm in faith. If he would have accepted, if he would have said, okay, I want a sign, would that have obligated him, in some sense, to the sign, to the faith required for the sign? Maybe that's the reason then, that maybe he said, no, I don't want this. You're asking too much. If you give me a sign, then you have made the decision about what I'm going to do, and I don't want to give that decision to you. I don't know. But it's an odd thing that God makes an offer that to us is perceived as an offer of grace. And Ahaz's response is, thanks, but no thanks. I'll handle this myself. So, Isaiah's response in verse 13 I find interesting. Who's he talking to?
He's talking to Ahaz, but he
Yeah.
addresses it as the house of David.
He's talking to Ahaz, but he addresses this, O house of David. What's the difference between Ahaz and O house of David? Okay, there's individual and collective. House of David is represented by Ahaz at this particular moment, but it seems like House of David and by the collective, it's not just the now, it's the future too. So in this sense, this is a word to the nation as it looks to its future, not just to a king who says, I'm not sure if I want to sign.
And I think under pressure, there's a tendency to forget where you come from, and so throwing in, oh, by the way, you are of the house of David, kind of maybe rekindle some things.
Good point. That your knees knocking like the leaves on the trees in the wind is not a good sign of being a descendant of David, is it? Man up, Ahaz. You come from good stock. Quit acting like this. Huh? And David was the man after God's own heart. So, that change of phrase, instead of saying, "Hear then, Ahaz," The change to "Hear, O house of David" evokes then all kinds of possible connections back and forward in history. Good, great. Now, what's Isaiah's next line?
Not to give you a sign anyway.
Is it too little for you to weary mortals, that you will weary my God also? Just struck me as a fascinating thought. People making God weary. God gets tired of what?
Our nonsense.
Refusal to have faith. God gets tired of engaging, trying to bring good, and people say, nah, not interested in your good, not interested in your will, not interested in what you want to accomplish. It's a fascinating sort of concept of God becoming weary. The preacher and me got to pondering last night. So, what do we do that makes God weary? But that's not this lesson. So, weary. So, verse 14. The Lord himself will give you a sign. Sorry you don't want it, Ahaz, it's coming anyway. This is the grace gift of God, will be a sign. Okay? What is the sign? It's kind of an unfolding long thing, isn't it? Young woman with child will bear a son, will name him Emmanuel, will eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse evil and good, choose the good. How old do you have to be to refuse the evil and choose the good?
Age of accountability.
I've been waiting for 66 years, well, not quite, since I got to the age of accountability to learn what that age was.
Am I there yet? Am I there yet?
I think you are. And the commentaries had interesting opinions about it too.
You're just like
Most parents of 2-year-olds think 2-year-olds have reached the age of knowing to refuse the good and to choose the evil. Some actually put this as like what we would call adolescence. And if the date they chose or the age they chose, actually from the time the prophecy is made, corresponds to when the northern kingdom falls, as an early teenager kind of thing. Which in that culture, that person would have reached adulthood and thus was responsible for their choices of good and evil, not their father anymore. I'm not sure what the eating curds and honey is all about. If that means he's going to partake in the prophetic line, or it means
is that the food of kings?
not necessarily. Curds is goat cheese, and honey. So it may simply mean the land's been devastated and there's no what we call like grapes and olives and vegetables and grain and that kind of stuff. All that's left is cheese you can get from goat's milk and wild honey that you could find maybe. So it may be associated with how quickly the fall is going to happen. Verse 16 really tells the prophecy, doesn't it? Or the good news to Ahaz. Whatever that age is that we've chickened out on trying to nail down how old this child will be. Before that happens, the land before whose two kings you are in dread will be deserted.
So he's trying to say this is all going to happen fairly soon?
Yes. And what will it represent for Ahaz and Jerusalem?
They're going to survive.
They're going to survive. I think I've got a question somewhere here. Is there a soteriological, is there a salvation or a deliverance message there? What's Ahaz going to be saved from?
Destruction.
Being destroyed. If he will listen and believe, what else will he be saved from? What's his present condition according to verse 2?
Fear.
He's scared to death. He can be saved from fear. He can be saved from destruction. He can be saved from the bad consequences of the wrong choice. There is a whole, I'm going to call it soteriological or salvation kind of deliverance mode in this promise that's bringing good into Ahaz's life. That's the contemporary application for him. Ahaz, stand firm in faith, believe God, trust God, grasp the sign, And before this kid is however old, 2 to 12, the two countries who you are afraid of right now will be empty. At least empty of their original inhabitants. Don't be afraid, trust in God.
The sign that God gave means much to us, but would it have encouraged Ahaz?
If he would have believed, I think it would have, to say, in a couple of years, the very nations I'm terrified of will be gone. The kings that are threatening me will be dead. I will be safe. I will be rescued. I will survive.
You know, a young woman, doesn't say virgin,
No.
so there are lots of young women,
Mhm.
and indeed, I don't know how many named Emmanuel, but would that, I don't see the encouragement in that statement to him.
The encouragement comes in the fact that the threat is temporary, but the Emmanuel is an important piece of it. Now, Isaiah doesn't translate Emmanuel like Matthew does. Why not?
The readers or hearers would have known what it
Yeah.
meant.
It was just a sentence in Hebrew. God is with us. So, a young woman is pregnant, and when she bears the child, she will name it, God is with us. I think that's a word of encouragement too. God is present. God is present in this circumstance where you're afraid. God is present in this circumstance where it looks like this superpower is just going to sweep down and destroy us. God is present in this circumstance where you don't know what to do because you're not, like I've found myself in lots of times. You're a leader in a context that you don't have the ability to lead given the demands of this situation. God is with us. You don't have to be a good leader. I think there's good news there, and it's saving kinds of news. Okay. Now, and you're quite right. It doesn't depend on whether it's a virgin or any young woman. It's salvation. Okay? Tom.
Was there a specific contemporary woman and child, or is this just a general statement?
We're not sure. Lots of scholars think it was Isaiah's wife, and that was going to be his third child. But there's nothing in the text that demands that you come to that conclusion. That's just a happy solution that some commentators drop upon. Marcia?
Do you get the idea, though, that he doesn't guarantee that Ahaz is going to survive? He didn't say
Not
that.
forever.
He just says that the nation of Israel, or the nation of Judah, is going to survive, and Judah as a whole will see these two nations disappear, or at least the population is
Yeah.
dissipated.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really tell
Ahaz.
Ahaz that he's going to be there to see it, does it?
This portion is not long-term future. It's immediate future. The implication is you'll survive this crisis, Ahaz. Okay? It doesn't say anything about the next crisis. Yeah. Now, some of the older translations had virgin in this particular passage in Isaiah 7:14. Most of the modern ones have young woman. The first translation to ever use the word virgin was the Septuagint, the translation from Hebrew into Greek that happened in the 3rd century BC. And that's the version Matthew quotes from. Because it does connect then. See, if you want virgin in this text, I don't think most Christians really want two virgin births. One in Isaiah's time and one in Jesus' time. In Isaiah's time, the virginity of the woman isn't the issue at stake. It's the time frame before God intervenes to fix things. But because the Septuagint had translated virgin and Matthew had a text in front of him, well, maybe not, he knew it in his mind, that said virgin, and as he thinks about the angel announcement to Joseph, that text comes to mind. And he says all that happened with Mary and Joseph and the angel happened in order that this text from Isaiah might be filled full. That is to say, you weren't real happy with the salvation in the Isaiah text. It wasn't enough for you. Apparently it wasn't enough for God either, because he filled it fuller in the meaning of Jesus. Still soteriological, saving, so that Jesus delivers from fear. Jesus delivers from crises. Jesus provides security, regardless of the political context in which we find ourselves. Lots of things of the of the Ahaz context apply of what Jesus can do in our lives too, and then a whole lot more. And so this text stands as a event in Judah and Israel's life. Kind of a tipping point of, will Ahaz trust God or not? He chooses not to. But the sign of his possibilities of God's intervention already there. And that sign becomes like a container that will be filled fuller and fuller and fuller with the coming of Christ in saving sorts of ways, rescuing sorts of ways. And all the stuff that applied to Ahaz applies to us and more. So part of the question is, will we stand firm in the faith? Yes.
So Ahaz did not obey God.
Doesn't appear to have. He made it to 715, which is longer than some people did in that
But
era.
what I'm saying is, did he join forces then with either of these kings?
I don't think that ever eventuated. I'm not sure they had time before Tiglath-Pileser turned and came upon them to actually pull it off. Well, Father, thank you for your word for us. Easy for us to get lost in this history and that history of ancient times. Remind us that that makes very clear that your intervening in our world is not some kind of broad, general, universal principle, but you intervene in actual circumstances of actual people's lives facing actual problems, which is how we've experienced the coming of Jesus in our life too, in the actuality of our problems and our fears, in the uncertainty of what direction to turn. You've come, yes, with a sign of Jesus. And so in this season, as we move from Advent into the celebration of Christ's birth, we welcome your presence with us and receive and commit ourselves to stand firm in faith that indeed you are sufficient for all of our fears, for all of our needs, for all of our circumstances. And we rejoice together in that, in Christ's name. Amen. Good week.